Dear friends, Salam alaikum. I'm continuing the second part of a discussion with my old colleague, the American scholar, Mr. Mujeeb Khan, author of many studies about Turkey, the situation of Muslims in the world, and the Arab Spring, and what have you. So in the first part of our video, we were discussing with Mr. Khan about, the history of Islamophobia and Turkophobia in the process of book writing in the Balkans. We were showing how Serbian Orientalists, but also Austrian and Vlach Orientalists in the case of Albania, they contributed a lot on inciting anti-Turkish and anti-Muslim hatred. In the case of Albania, I give a small resume how Albania was turned, the official ideology of Albanianism was turned into an anti-Islamic ideology, where Turkey, Islam, the Sharia, the Ottomans were declared the enemy of the nation. I mentioned the book that I published in 2010 about the school books of Kosovo, how children in Kosovo, they are taught with anti-Muslim hatred, and they are told that for you to be a good Albanian, you should worship the anti-Muslim hero Skanderbeg, and the Turks came and they forcefully turned us into Muslim, but we are not real Muslim. So I want to let Mujeeb continue his discussion and continue where we left. Mujeeb, if you can just bring your laptop a bit. Yeah, that's it. No, okay, that's good. Because now you are in the center of the camera. And yeah, the line is to you. You can continue.
Thank you, Olsi. This is a very fascinating discussion. And you know what, it occurred to me, you were describing how the myths and narratives that were constructed to basically alienate the Albanian Muslim majority from their own glorious history. As I mentioned, the Albanian Muslims produced more Grand Viziers of the great Ottoman Empire, which straddled 3 continents, which many people are recognizing. A number of books have just come out, recently. Mark David Baer has one on the Ottomans, and there was an earlier one by a scholar at Yale, but in how central they were in a way to modernity and to sort of linking the globe together, because they did straddle Asia, Africa, and Europe. And the Albanians played a leading role in that. They, as I said, produced more Grand Viziers than any other nation, proportionally. And you had great figures from the Koprulu dynasty to Muhammad Ali. And I always found it just, ironic that these are the most historically consequential Albanians. And yet in Albania itself, they're not celebrated. There are no statues, there's no, postage stamps, and so on. Though there is, as you pointed out, this great iconography of sort of a Christian Albanian nation and nationalism, even though they're not the majority population. What I found interesting or fascinating about the Albanian case is that, in a way, it prefigures what happened in the Arab world after the breakup of the Ottoman state, and then in turn happened in the Republic of Turkey itself. So this is fascinating because, you see, just as this kind of secular proto-Christian Albanian nationalism was constructed both by outsiders and by also Christian Albanians, with Muslims and their history distorted or elided, the same thing happened with the so-called Arab nationalism. So a whole myth was constructed about Arab nationalism by George Antonius, for example, who was, the Great Arab Awakening was this foundational text that he wrote. And you had these different sort of nationalist leagues in Beirut during this time period just before and then after World War I, which was to construct this Arab nationalism separate from the broader Ottoman Muslim identity that the vast majority of Muslims had and were loyal to. And so a myth was created of the Arab revolt. And this was sensationalized, of course, in the famous movie by David Lean, Lawrence of Arabia. So you had this English guy who dresses up kind of in, robes and flowing headgear, and then leads the Arabs against the Turkish colonizers or occupiers. It's complete myth-making.
I'm sorry if I can interrupt
you
for a second, because the Orientalist school follows the same script. I mean, if you have in the case of the Arabs, the British actor who plays Lawrence.
Exactly.
Yeah. In the case of Albania, the first movie about Skanderbeg was made by the Soviets, and the guy who plays Skanderbeg in the movie, he's not an Albanian, he's a Georgian, Akaki Harota. So the image the Albanians have about their anti-Turkish hero is, of course, not Albanian, is a Georgian, is a Soviet. Like with the Arabs, their hero is a British who plays the script. I'm sorry for it.
Right, and of course the great myth about all of that was that there was no Arab revolt. The vast majority of Arab Muslims supported the Ottoman state to the very end. And they fought at Gallipoli, they fought at the Gaza front, they fought very bravely in Kut al-Amarna in Iraq, side by side with Turkish, Bosnian, Albanian, other Ottoman Muslims. So till the very end, and in Palestine and so on, and Syria, they were loyal to the Ottoman state because this was their state, and they recognized it, and they recognized the Sultan as a leader of their civilization. And only a few Bedouin tribes revolted, and they were bribed by the British. And the Bedouins, they would sell themselves 5 times a day to whoever was winning or whoever paid them more. So it wasn't even about nationalism. But a whole myth was constructed about the so-called Arab revolt. Sati al-Husri, many of them were disproportionately Christian Arabs, and that made sense, right? They were in a way patronized by the French or the Russians or the British, and really did not feel much loyalty or attachment to the Ottoman state. But the majority of Arabs are, of course, Muslim, and this was not in any way an alien occupation or colonization. They were an integral part, as were Albanian Muslims or Bosnian Muslims or Caucasian Muslims of the Ottoman state, and which they were loyal to. And not only they, but Muslims throughout the world, supported the Ottoman state to the very end, including in Aceh, in South Africa, and of course, the majority of the world's Muslim population, which is located in South Asia, what was the British Indian Empire, which had taken over from the Mughals. They all saw the Ottoman state as representing Muslim power in the international system. And should that state be destroyed or broken up, they had this very intuitive understanding that they themselves would be subjected to enslavement, subjugation, or even worse, some forms of genocidal ethnic cleansing, which we see is going on even as we speak today. So, this was one of the myths, Arab. Now, what's even more ironic? So we talked about how the Arabs, in terms of this myth, was created by these despotic Arab regimes, right? These dictatorships and so on, the Ba'athist and what have you. But even these despotic royal families who were installed by the British, like the Saudis and the Al Nahyan family in the Emirates, and also the dictator Sisi, for example, General Sisi in Egypt. They've incorporated these myths to be used against Turkey today, though the majority of people never bought them. I traveled throughout the Arab world, and you'll often hear, especially from the older people, but now in the new generation as well, that the great tragedy was when the Uthmaniyun, were kicked out or destroyed, or the state was broken up, because since then you had the Balfour Declaration, you had the whole colonization, and we see that in the creation of these artificial states with these dictators put in power. And that we're still suffering from that, and the whole attempt to overthrow the Arab Spring by installing these dictators led by Israel, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, with support from the US, the Western ostensible guardians of democracy, were the ones who allowed the bloody coup and massacre of thousands to take place in Egypt at Rabaa Square. And then you saw that spread to Sudan, to Libya, to Yemen, Bahrain, throughout the region, to crush the Arab Spring, because they fear Muslim democracy. because they would put an end to imperialism, there would be a very high price to pay for supporting the ongoing ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians and so on. So, of course, the West is complicit, fully complicit in this. And but what I wanted to add was, ironically, the Turks themselves incorporated this after. So, you know, what was known as the Turkish War of Liberation was known as the Milli Mujadeli, or the national struggle of the millet. And the millet was not defined according to some Turkic, Central Asian, Turanic constructions of identity. It was the Ottoman Muslim millet. And the people who fought in it, you know, included Kurds, included Albanians, included Bosnians, included Central Turks from Anatolia, and Arabs as well. And it had vital support from the Muslims of South Asia as part of what was known as the Khilafat movement, which prevented British intervention on behalf of the invading Greek armies. And it was fought as a Muslim national struggle, led by Mustafa Kemal Pasha. And only once that victory, and you know, Sanusi, the great Libyan leader, played a role in rallying the Turkish armies as well against the Greeks and the French and Italians and the British, as did Said Nursi and others. It was only after the victory was achieved that then you had Ataturk. You know, he becomes Ataturk, right, afterwards, and launches a revolution, the Kemalist revolution. And it's so ironic that they incorporated the same anti-Ottoman, anti-Seljuk, and anti-Islamic myths about Orientalist myths and self-hatred, backwardness, and so on, and the need to do away with Islam as this Arab, Asiatic kind of thing. So it's ironic, the Kemalists themselves then incorporated this and attempted to construct a new identity, and an absurd one at that, based on the Hittites, for example, based on France as a model, or this pagan Central Asian Turanic shamanism, things of this sort. So they changed the azan, of course, and changed Allah to Tanri, Ulududir, for example, instead of Allahu Akbar. And so of course, as in the case of the majority of Arab Muslims or Albanian Muslims, they never accepted this. They understood what it was. It was an assault on their own faith, on their own history, on their very identity by minority population. But what explains that, Olsi? So, for me, for example, in the sense of the Kemalist, it's said that, well, this was, Ataturk's great confidence. He won these victories, and through this great confidence, he was able to reject the Orientalist barbarism and backwardness and embrace this Western identity. But that's not the case at all. First of all, the war and victory, as we said, was Milli Mujadeli, was a Muslim national struggle. It was the Muslims who won the war, Turkish War of Liberation, against the invaders of Anatolia and so on, who wanted to basically do in Anatolia, create an Armenian state, create a Greek state in the West, and basically eliminate, just as the Muslims had been ethnically cleansed from the Caucasus, the Chechens, the Circassians, and others, the Crimeans, Tatars, as well as the Albanians and Bosnian Muslims in the Balkans. The same thing was planned for Anatolia, of course, but they failed. They were defeated. But it wasn't this, some great act of, because they fought it and won it as a Muslim national struggle. But the Young Turk ideology of Ataturk had incorporated the same the same self-loathing, the same inferiority complex that the Albanian and Arab nationalist, secular nationalist had as well, which is to say that it came from trauma. And the trauma was this. As I have a chapter in this collective volume that came out on the Balkan Wars, and it's titled The Problematic Origins of Genocide, Ethnic Cleansing, and Humanitarian Interventionism in the Modern Middle East and Europe. And so I point out that modern genocide before Hitler and Stalin and so on in Europe, the return of genocide, was centered on the Ottoman Eastern question, or the question of Ottoman Muslims, and the idea was that they were an alien presence in Europe, even though as the Albanians and Bosnians were indigenous to, of course, to Europe, the fact that they had taken on the faith and identity and civilization of the Ottomans, or this alien other, they had to be forcibly converted or expelled or exterminated. And this is the process of genocide, as we discussed. It goes back to Njegoš and his writings, and unfortunately, even people like Kadare and others incorporated. And you pointed out in the Albanian case, but it was trauma. My point is that it was really trauma. Why do the Europeans hate us? Why did they, commit this genocidal ethnic cleansing against us? Well, it has to do with, many of us are racially European. Ataturk had blonde hair, kind of blondish hair, blue eyes, right? And so on, but they were considered still not European. Well, it's because of this backward, Orientalist, desert, Arab religion and civilization. And if we just get rid of that, then the people who are persecuting us, these Christian Europeans, they would accept us. So it's really that inferiority complex. And it's sad, though, of course, that the people who are persecuting you, you actually internalize, their hatred against you, rather than standing up against it, defeating it, and being proud of your glorious history and identity. So that really explains it. And of course, now we're seeing that, right? As you have democratization, as you have the ongoing Western imperialism, Russian imperialism, which sadly still exists from Libya to Syria, what we're seeing, so on, to the Persian Gulf and all the military bases that they have there and the dictators that they seek to keep in place, like the Saudis and the Emiratis, and to siphon off the natural resource wealth of the region. There is now an awakening taking place, and that awakening, of course, happened in Turkey as Turkey democratized as a Kemalist military bureaucratic establishment, which was essentially a form of dictatorship of a minority, alienated minority. They were defeated politically as the Anatolian Muslim majority came to power through the political process and through their economic strength, as the Anatolian middle class, Anatolian tigers, under Özal, Turgut Özal. This is when you see this opening with Turgut Özal, and of course it's continued with the AKP and President Erdogan. You see that awakening taking place, and certainly in the Arab world you're seeing that too. In Libya you saw Libyan patriots fought side by side with Turkish military officers, just as they did, under the Senussi and against the Italian colonizers and invaders in 1911. Remember, the 1911 Italian invasion directly led the Balkan Wars, where the Holy Christian Alliance, as it was called, sought to, piggyback on the Italian war of aggression to eliminate the Ottoman Muslim presence in the Balkans. As well. So there was very much interconnected. But then we saw the defeat of the French, the Emiratis, the Israelis, the Russians, and Wagner outside of Tripoli by this Turkish and Libyan Muslim alliance, using the network drone power and so on. You saw the liberation of Karabakh in Azerbaijan, and also in Idlib, Assad's genocidal forces being checked as well. So you're seeing this return, this awakening, and I think you're certainly seeing it in the Arab world, where polls consistently show Erdogan is the most popular leader in the Muslim world, as he is, in Pakistan, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. You're seeing that I think in the Balkans as well, because I think people are understanding, they're seeing, this ideology, whether it's the Greek chauvinism or the Serbian chauvinism and this kind of genocidal hatred against. I'm seeing that also that Bosnian Muslims and Albanian Muslims are understanding that they were victims of genocide from the same sources, the same well springs, and in the important thing to underscore there, the Bosnians, I think, are more aware of this than Albanians are. Albanians still suffer from a great deal of propaganda because they think that Tony Blair and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush saved them. right, from genocide and ethnic cleansing.
I would probably correct you here. Probably are the Kosovar elites, because especially in Albania now, with witch hunt that the U.S. embassy is doing against Albanian businesses and politicians, there is a growing anti-Americanism, for which we speak a lot in Albanian media, but is very little known from outside, because Americans are really crazy with what is going on. So I think the wave is changing.
Okay, that's interesting. But my only point was to say that, the West did not save the Bosnian Muslims. They covered up the genocide. I was involved in that, in exposing the Bosnian genocide, because I was afraid something like that would happen, and I was in contact with Bosnian leaders in Chicago in April of 1992. And we saw that, we were flabbergasted that there was complete silence. We were giving all kinds of detailed reports of mass murders and rapes and so on taking place in Foča, Visegrad, because we had the testimony, for people calling their relatives and exposing what was happening. Complete silence from the American government. And it was only later, in August 1992, that we came to understand, after the Omerska and the camps were, quote unquote, revealed by Ed Volyami of The Guardian, ITN television crew, and so on, that there's a deliberate campaign of covering up the genocide by the U.S. government under Lawrence Eagleburger and Brent Scowcroft, the architects of the New World Order. President Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, the father, did not want to intervene, so they covered up the genocide. This indicated to the Serbs that the genocide could continue. But again, so my point with Kosovo is too that in Kosovo they did not intervene to stop the atrocities on the ground for months. They bombed 15,000 feet from the air, which only 300 Serbian soldiers were killed, and they let that go on for 3 months because they did not want to lose a single Allied soldier in order to save the Kosovar Albanians from the massacres that took place there. So that was the point I was making.
Excellent. Thank you very much for enlightening this. Yeah, we know. We are numbers. We are numbers for great imperial powers. During my work at the British National Archives, I've read so many reports about the massacres that the Bulgarians and Serbs were doing against the Muslims during First Balkan War, and the British knew everything, and they didn't care.
Right.
Because
they only cared when Christian minorities were massacred. Whether Armenians, Bulgarians, and so on in Batak. That's the only time. But far more Muslims were killed by the Russians or Bulgarians and so on, and it never became an issue for the Western imperial powers.
And for us Muslims in the Balkans, we have get used to this for the past 100 years. From the moment that the Turk went out, we knew that once the Turk goes out, then the fate of the Muslims will be horrible.
Unless you convert, or unless you do away with your Muslim or Ottoman, that's the only way you could save yourself, right, from this kind of persecution or genocidal ethnic cleansing, is either you formally convert, or at the very least, you become completely secular to the extent where you say, we have nothing to do with Islam or the Ottomans or anything of that sort. We're either Christians or we're atheists. Hence, that's what happened in Albania, right?
In my doctoral thesis, I mentioned a British Foreign Office report of 1919, where this official without name is telling to the British Foreign Office that when Turkey collapsed in the Balkans, we had 3 options with the Albanians. Number 1, to kill them all and deport them to Anatolia. Number 2 was to create a state for them, but it was something not really good. And number 3, to leave them under the civilizational rule of the Greeks and the Serbs. So with the case of the Albanians, with us in Albania, they choose to create a secular anti-Muslim state for us after the Congress of Lushny in 1920, when Islam was officially removed. There was a reign of terror in Albania from 1920 to 1923, where every Albanian was forced to accept the flag that we have nowadays with the eagle, which is the Christian symbol, to remove the Ottoman flag, to stop writing the language in Osmanlija, and to speak the new Albanian that we speak. Because some information for our viewers, the Albanian that we speak today in Albania, which has been adopted by Kosovo as well, was not spoken 100 years ago. The Albanian that we speak nowadays is a Tosk dialect from Permet, from where I come from, which has been cleansed from the barbaric words. I mean, when you go to literature class in Albanian university or high school, your teacher, you will have a special chapter on the fight against barbarisms. So barbarism is the language that your grandmother speaks. So if your grandmother calls the angel Melache, or calls God Allah, or calls the sky Hava, and doesn't call the sky Ciel, then you are a barbarian. Because what happened with the Albanian, what happened to the Albanian language when Albania was created? The people who created Albania, Vlach, like Alexander Xhuvani, Mihal Grameno, they had to invent a new Albanian. Because number one, there was not one Albanian language spoken from Kosovo to Korça. Because we were different vilayets, different dialects, different languages. Han, in his Albanian studies, shows that the Tosks and the Gegs could not understand each other, but if they lived like 6 months with each other, they could learn the language. So they created a new language for us, where this language was de-Islamized. Words like inshallah, mashallah, belediye, and what you have, which were Turkish and Iranian and Arabic, were removed, and they were replaced with the Italian and English words. And then, so, I mean, we Muslims in Balkans, we know, like you mentioned, even the Arab case, we are a product of a colonial project, a colonial setup. And it was very interesting what you mentioned at the beginning, the role of Arab Christians in Lebanon on creating Arab nationalism and in constructing this myths. The same thing happened with us in Albania, in the Balkans. Christians were employed by the imperialists because they were seen as the most trusted people in their imperial project. But if we can come to the present times, Mujeeb, I think that the imperialist project is still continuing. Probably I've seen there are many articles, many shout-outs coming from America, from people like Alon-Ben Meir or David Phillips, Israeli American citizens who yet on Voice of America and other medias about the threat that Erdogan is causing to the Balkans, about the return of the Turk, danger that is happening. And on the other hand, we have the Gulenists. You know, we have a new factor now in the Balkans. If in time of the British Empire, the British were trying to grow or to create their own loyal Mohammedanism, now there is a new phenomena, especially in the Balkans, with the Gulenists. And if we can come back to the latest visit of Erdogan in Albania, where the funding, I think I have to correct myself, was the investment for the housing unit was 40 million euro by Turkey. We have the Gulenists who went mad on attacking Erdogan, and because Turkey is complaining to Albania, because we in Albania, we have an institution, Church of Islam, called the Muslim community, which has been created by the secular state after the creation of the Republic, where this institution, since 2003, with the killing of the Secretary General of the Muslim community of Albania, Sali Tivari, has been given into control to the Gulenists. And the Gulenists today, they have built an empire in Albania, but not only, even in Kosovo, Macedonia.
Right.
Only in Albania, they run around 5 private hospitals, TV stations, 2 universities, and they even control many state universities, which ironically, these state universities are constructed with money from Turkey. So
right.
Coming back to the old game of the colonialists, if in the days of Lawrence of Arabia, you'll have the Sharif Hussein of Mecca,
right.
who will issue his fatwas against the evil Ottoman Caliph, and will say, and declaring that the new Caliph will be an Arab. We still have this old Orientalist game into play, but today is the good cleric of the West, Fetullah Gulen, the Gulenist, against the evil Sultan Erdogan. What do you think? What is your observation on this?
No, I think that's definitely the case. Gulen, in Albania, you have 2 such movements which are targeting 2 leading Muslim countries which pose a challenge to Israeli dominance in the region, which are Turkey and Iran. So you have the Mojaheden Khalq, for example, which is a base, and it's not a coincidence that Albania was chosen for this. So Albania is playing the role as a base for this terrorist group, Mujahideen, with a crazy cult-like character and nature and so on, to destabilize Iran. And then to destabilize Turkey, you have a similar cult-like group, which showed that it also works as a terrorist organization because it played the central, it was behind the bloody coup attempt, July 15, 2016, to overthrow the democratically elected government in Turkey. And Gulen and his movement have long-standing ties to the CIA and and other Western intelligence agencies. It's something I've studied along with my colleague M. Hakan Yavuz. Has written a number of books on this, but we follow this movement for many years, and it's very close ties to Western intelligence agencies through these networks of schools and associations operating from Central Asia to the Balkans, was very well known and commented on, and even admitted, because we didn't know many of the insiders of this movement, that they were seeking to ingratiate themselves as a way of getting power with the West. And what happened is that when Erdogan turned against Israel over the massacres in Gaza and was pursuing with the Arab Spring an independent foreign policy and assuming leadership in the Muslim world for the first time since the breakup of the Ottoman state, they found this very threatening. And so they mobilized the Gulenist starting in 2013 to basically launch a coup from within Turkey, trying to take over, for example, MIT, the National Intelligence Organization. They had already taken over the police forces, and they had infiltrated the army to a great extent. But when the Turkish state started to move against them, by 2015, they were desperate not to lose their control or power, and that's when they decided to launch the coup. And the coup, like the coup, overthrow of like Morsi's government in Egypt and the anti-counter revolution against the Arab Spring, the attack on Turkey and Qatar were very much part of that movement. It was led by the Israelis, the Emiratis, and the Saudis, but behind them, of course, was the U.S., the French, for example, and the British as well, who supported, of course, this rollback operation. But it failed miserably in Turkey. So now you have the Gulenists. Many other countries, they were rolled up, like in Pakistan, Central Asia, and so on. Unfortunately, in Albania, because Albania is so subordinate to whatever Uncle Sam wants and the Israel lobby wants, with Richard Grenell, for example, who's this crazy right-wing racist militant tied to Trump, and was ambassador to Germany, but who interfered greatly in Albanian elections in Kosovo. He was very much involved in this. And so the Gulen, one of the last bases for both this Mojaheden terror cult, as well as the Gulenist terror cult, is unfortunately Albania. So they're using these groups as a last remaining shelter or bastion that they have to still try to influence politics in the rest of the Muslim world, and specifically Turkey.
Mujeeb, since you know Turkey much better than me probably, I just have a question. As I mentioned before, the Gulenists today, they run 2 private universities, college, almost all the madrasas of Albania. They control the mosques of Albania. And on the other hand, we have an ambassador, American ambassador in Albania, Yuri Kim, a person who, according to Turkish intelligence service, was one of the persons who coordinated with Osman Kavala the protests of the Gezi Park during the revolts of, the protests of Gezi Park in Turkey. And on the other hand, we have Turkey, which is a very powerful state. But, if you see Turkey and compare the influence of Turkey over the Gulenists in Albania, is very weak, even though Turkey is a very powerful state. I give you personal examples. I taught history at University of Durrës, Alexander Moisiu, where our rector, but even the administrator of the university, they were Gulenists. But our university was being constructed with the money from TICA. The same thing goes to University of Tirana and other places, where, because Albania is a failed, bankrupt, poor state run by mafia, drug money, and Turkey is coming like big brother and throwing money. Or like the example of the hospital of fear that Turkey donated to Albania. Now, while Turkey gives so many donations to Albania, very often in these institutions, the Gulenists, because you know how they operate like a mafia, like a masonry, they never reveal who they are. You only see them jumping at the last moment. For example, now that we had Erdogan, who was received by thousands of Albanians, people who were crying and thanking him, even Catholics, with their mythology against the Turks. Catholics have been very pro-Ottomans, and they serve to Ottomans as mercenaries. So whenever they find somebody who feeds them, they go with them. And because the Gulenists went mad with what Turkey was doing, they launched a huge attack on Erdogan and on Turkey in Albanian medias, blaming Erdogan for being a dictator and what have you. We have a recent scandal in Albania. The salaries of the Albanians were leaked to the media. So you can go there and you can find my salary of Edi Rama, everybody. And what we found out by investigating this list, there were probably like 1 million people who were getting salaries. The Gulenists, they have built such a huge network of mercenaries in Albania that they pay many people. They pay people from Baton Hadziu, who controls major TV programs in Albanian televisions and in Kosovo. They were paying him like 15,000 euro a month. They are paying many journalists and analysts who very often make anti-Turkish and anti-Ottoman remarks. And these people, now that Erdogan came to Albania, they were all attacking Erdogan because, of course, at the end of the month, they have to get a salary from the Gulenists. But now, when we compare, and what I'm telling to you is, in a way, even to debunk a bit the myth that is being created by Israeli Islamophobes like Alon-Ben Meir and David Phillips, that Erdogan is coming, is taking over the Balkans. We have to, if we see the facts on the ground, especially in Albania, the Gulenists have built such a huge empire. They control universities. They have penetrated even the secret service in Albania, the police, the army. And what Turkey is doing, this is a big question mark for me. it is donating so much money to Albania. It is the greatest donor to Albania. And by the way, even the greatest investor, because we had some data which were leaked, which were shown by our government recently, showing that Canada is #1 investor in Albania. It is not true. There is a Canadian oil extracting company called Bankers Petroleum. They simply steal the Albanian oil and they claim that they do investment, but they do nothing. But the country that is arming the Albanian army is giving even close to Albanian police, cars, motorcycles, and what have you, it is Turkey.
Right.
The question is this: Turkey is throwing so much money to Albania, but on the other hand, you have a country like Albania with our Prime Minister Edi Rama, who either is ungrateful to Turkey, or probably they cheat Erdogan and they tell to him, look, we cannot do anything because we have the Americans. And as you rightly mentioned, Albania today is the base of 2 terrorist organizations. One are the Mojaheden al-Haq, who have a paramilitary camp in Durrës, Manza, from where they run operations against Iran, and probably they even kill people, but they work hand in hand with the Israeli Mossad. And on the other hand, you have the Gulenists, who have this powerful network, and who are used as well by Zionist lobby and Israelis. We have our Gulenist muftis who are taken by USA, are being sent to Jerusalem, and they go to Yad Vashem, you know, and in a way
Right.
they try to normalize the Israeli invasion of East Jerusalem. And on the other hand, is what does Turkey have in Albania? They give a lot of money to our government. They have one private university, and that's it. So, I mean, I want to understand why Turkey is not doing more, if you can answer to this.
Yes. Well, I think the reason is Turkey is very sensitive in regards to the diplomacy and to being subjected to these kinds of criticism that you see of trying to pursue a neo-Ottoman colonial policy in Albania, interfering in Albanian domestic politics. So you saw that, for example, in Kosovo, with the arrest of some Gulenist officials who were then deported to Turkey. But that became a big scandal, remember, with Ramush Haradinaj, right, who was the prime minister of Kosovo, because he was involved, I think, in approving the deportation orders. But this was picked up by the Gulenist movement, but their supporters in the U.S. and Israel as well, to say that, oh, look, the Albania is Kosovo's cooperating with Erdogan's witch hunt or his campaign against. Now, the fact is, of course, that these.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. Why doesn't Turkey use the counter argument? We had the Gulenists who were sent to Turkey to face justice. But how many Americans, how many Albanians are being sent back to United States to face justice? And nobody speaks about it. Number one. Number two is what I say when I go in Albanian medias who attack Turkey and say, look, they have a chant against Gulenists. I tell them, but look, Americans have jailed dozens of Albanians in Albania and Kosovo because they claim that these people are terrorists because they want to fight in Syria, or because they send some text messages to people who are in Syria, or because they serve as taxi drivers for sending a guy to the airport. And these people have been jailed in Albania for dozens of years, and nobody says anything about it. Number two is when I go to Albanian media, because they say, oh, why is Turkey intervening here? I'm telling to them, gentlemen, we're having businessmen arrested, properties confiscated, politicians in jail in Albania on orders by the US ambassador.
Right.
So the question is why Turkey is not using this counter argument and to tell to Albanians, look, I'm asking for some terrorists who are hiding in Albania or Kosovo who have harmed my state. Like Albania did in the past, we sent people of the Muslim Brotherhood to Mubarak in Egypt, and some of them were even executed illegally by the Americans in Tirana. So the question is, should probably Turkey become more aggressive on defending its image and not becoming so apologetic?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I think, in terms of the money, in terms of what TIKA is doing, also education, I think it would be important to maybe make it conditional on arrest of some of these fugitives who were involved in the July 15th coup attempt or had knowledge of it, and I think also to be aggressive in the pushback against this anti-Turkish and anti-Ottoman propaganda. And I think the most effective way of doing that is to link it to Serbian propaganda or Greek propaganda against Albanian Muslims, to say that your rhetoric and your propaganda is from the same source as those who committed genocide against Albanian Muslims in Kosovo and before as well, going back to the Balkan Wars. And I think that would be effective. It's to show how the ideology is the same as those who, committed all of these atrocities, which not that long ago, which we're all so familiar with the horrific things that were done by them. And I think, Turkey needs to link it to that and to what's happened. And I think that can have an impact in terms of resonating with the Albanian Muslim majority.
If I can make one more observation, is that
sure.
I mentioned this when I go in Albanian medias. The greatest foreign country which have invested in Albania in state infrastructure since the creation of Albania after fascist Italy, which annexed us, Soviet Union, which built factories in the country, and China.
Right.
So the fourth country is Turkey. There is no foreign country who have come to Albania, who have donated hospitals, who have built universities, who have built homes for the elderly, orphanages, like Turkey is doing.
Right.
So the investment of Turkey is so huge, but many people want to ask, what is Turkish diplomacy doing in the Balkans? For example, the Turks are being insulted a lot. I give you an example. The head of the National Library of Albania, he has volumes of anti-Erdogan, anti-Turkish articles. He gets funding from the Turkish government for his library because the Albanian state is bankrupt, doesn't have money. Take the National Archive. Turkey is donating millions of dollars to our National Archive. Its director is an anti-Ottoman, anti-Muslim, anti-Turk. Now the thing is this, Mujeeb, the Americans, they don't give you even a penny, or the Israelis, forget it about that. But even if they give you, they will vet you so much. And
they expect you to perform fully for them.
They never release the money until and unless they are really sure that you are going to serve to them or do something for them. But the question that makes upset many Muslims in Albania is that why Turkey is not more aggressive on defending its image, on even having a media to defend its image in the country. So what I think is that this is an observation from the Balkans, and for our Turkish colleagues who can see this video, is that Turkey is failing miserably. In 2010, when I presented my book on the schools of Kosovo, who incidentally, these books were printed with the money from Turkey by TIKA for free for their Kosovar brothers, I presented my findings at a conference in Bilecik, Turkey, Bilecik University. And I remember in the time we had some Turkish officials who were very upset with my presentation because I was reading them paragraphs from our textbooks where Turks are shown as barbarians, as ignorance, as Asians, as so many racisms. And one of them, I think he was a general or whatever, somebody from the military. He stood up and made me a question and told me, look, but we thought that the Arnauts are our brothers. And I told this general, yes, we were your brothers, but 100 years ago. No longer so, because so many generations have passed. So much brainwashing has been made.
Right.
And the thing that I remember when I made my book in 2010, we had Minister Davutoglu and another one from the government of the time who went to Pristina and Tirana and told them we want the rewriting of the school textbooks, but nothing happens. When I, at the University of Durrës, I was teaching economic history of Albania. One colleague who had made a textbook about economy of Albania, which was supposed to deal with the economy, he was saying when the Turks came, they brought destruction and they only built mosques in Albania. Can you imagine? This is a university textbook.
Right.
And you tell your students that when Turks came here, they destroyed our civilization, they built only mosques, and they brought barbarism. And we have people in the municipality of Tirana, which receives a lot of money from Turkey, who even write articles and claim that before coming of the Turks, Albania had universities, Albania was like Paris, and so many stupid things, which if you write such things against the Americans, but even against gypsies, there will be some human rights organizations who will come and who will protest and who will say, you are inciting racism against this particular. In Albania, I mean, you know better than me, you cannot even criticize Israel. There are many Albanians who are Albanian courts have sent them to prison for insulting Israel on Facebook and for defending Palestinians. While we have this reign on terror on not criticizing the West, Israel, the Americans, when it comes to the Turks, there are so many lies. When Erdogan came to Albania, I was invited by a number of TV stations, and many journalists were yelling at me and telling to me, why did Erdogan came on the 17th January, which is the day of the death of Skanderbeg. I was telling gentlemen, number one, we don't know when did Skanderbeg die, because it's a myth about his death. And number two, Skanderbeg was not killed by the Turks, he was killed by mosquitoes, because he died from So I was telling to them, go and blame the mosquitoes about it. And number three, it was not Erdogan who came here, but it was Edirama who invited. So why don't you go to Edirama? Because there was so much noise by the Islamophobes, and in particular by the Gulenist medias, who nowadays they run even national televisions in Albania. And they were attacking Turkey, Erdogan, and in particular Islamism. So these were my comments. I have much more to say, but I just wanted to share with you the situation. And there is something, because you were mentioning the Bosniaks before and the Albanians. There is a big difference between Albanian elites and the people. You probably know when Erdogan came, there were like thousands of people in the Skanderbeg main square, not celebrating Skanderbeg, but Erdogan. They were crying. There, you had Catholics who were praising Erdogans, you know? And there is a difference in Albania between the elites and the common people. In Albania, if you are a pro-Turk, like I am, a pro-Ottoman, pro-Islam, then you are censored. You are not given a full-time job in university, like with me. I mean, if you are blamed and like an Islamist or a pro-Turkish, pro-Erdogan, you cannot enter into universities. And moreover, now with the Gulenist control over universities, you have to be as Islamophobe as possible in order to get into the elite of the country. And this elite goes from the universities to the media, is very anti-Turkish and anti-Islamist. And then there are many Muslim believers, many of them who are intellectuals, who are afraid to speak. Because if you speak on defense of Turkey and Islam, then you lose your job. And on the other hand, there is a Turkish foundation called Marif, which has a university in Tirana called the New York University. The deputy director of this university is a Zionist, a supporter of Israel. His name is Ilir. And one of the lecturers, her name is Mirela Bogdani, she's an open anti-Turkish Islamophobe who was even fired from the Conservative Party in UK when she was living in UK as a student for her Islamophobic remarks. But these people, they're paid by the Turks. So, I mean, it's a mess, Mujeeb. I'm sorry that I'm saying this thing in the camera, but I hope our Turkish friends really understand what the hell is going on. I mean, Turks, sometimes they're like the Soviets or like the Russians. They are good on doing tank diplomacy. They know where to place the tanks and the drones, but sometimes they're not good on soft power.
Yeah, I think you raise important issues. I think originally they were concerned because of this kind of unjustified slander that they were subjected to, that they had to be very tentative and be very diplomatic. But I think you raised the important point that that should no longer be the case. That and I think they need to build up an alternative and original Muslim Albanian Muslim leadership, which reflects not just Albania, because remember, when we speak of Albania, we are also speaking of Macedonia and of Kosovo, and because they're the same people, the same nation, and if you take them as a whole, then I think it's quite clear we can confidently say that there is an Albanian Muslim majority, which is very much tied to its history of being part of the Ottoman Islamic civilization, and so we need to mobilize them, and I think the most effective, we need to be very clear in attacking those who slander the Ottoman and Islamic identity of the Albanian majority by saying that this is directly linked to what the genocidal Serbs, Greeks, others did to our people, and you're standing with them. Basically, we need to confront them to saying that your propaganda is the same propaganda that the killers in Gajkova, in Drenica, in Prizren, when they were carrying out in Suvareka, they were carrying out the massacres. This is what they were saying, what you're saying now about killing Turks, driving out Islam, cleansing the territory, and history, destroying the mosque and the monuments and so on. This is what they were doing, and this is what you're doing. How dare you do that? So I think that we need to do that, but we need to build those links then with the Albanian Muslim majority and with Turkey, and make it conditional, as you said, in a way. They need to vet, where their money is going. The money they'll be happy to take it in Albania, universities or infrastructure and so on. But the Albanian Muslims need to organize and go to Turkey and say, please give us the money, but make sure you're giving it to people who love and respect you and our common history together, rather than those, who are working to denigrate it, who are working for our enemies.
The problem, Mujeeb, is that I think there are some bureaucratic problems in Turkey. Yeah. Probably even corruption. While Erdogan is a great leader, he has modernized Turkey, has armed it, has turned Turkey into a headache for the imperialists of the East and the West. And Turkey is no longer a slave of a Western agenda, but follows its national interest. There is a problem, like in the time of Abdul Hamid, there was a lot of corruption underground, the nose of the Sultan. So I think this is what happens in the Balkans. If you talk with many Albanian Muslims, people who used to love Turkey and love it a lot, they are very disappointed. I mean, there are even many nationalist Albanians. I mean, people who are very secular in nature, but who look at Turkey like the big brother that we have in the Balkans. But they see Turkish officials who are corrupt. And when they see their institutions who do nothing, I mean, they come to Albania and talk to us about Yunus Emre. Who cares? I mean, Yunus Emre was a great guy, but he's in Anatolia. We had our own Yunus Emres in the Balkans. Now, I mean, we have 30 years of openness democracy in Albania, where Turkey has been the major country for educating the Albanians. We have our army, our police, many intellectuals.
And recognition of Kosovo. Turkey led the campaign to recognize
Kosovo, arming of Albania, standing by Albania, protecting its national sovereignty. But Turkey has failed on the soft power. We don't have one institute for writing our own history. You know, I mean, we have imams in Albania and Kosovo, and one of the reasons why I make these videos in YouTube is because one of them, who they do not know who was Haji Chamil, they do not know who are the Ittihad wa Taraki. We do not have Ottoman institutes to show to our people who we were, to show to our people who were the Kuprilists, what they did, who was Ali Pasha, and whatever. So still our institutes of history are run by Orientalists, anti-Turks, anti-Muslims, who even if you do not show to them who you are, if you go and work for them, if they see any single article that you praise the Turks or Islam, they will fire you. There is an intellectual apartheid. There are many mainstream medias in Albania who are afraid to take me, because when they take me, I defend the Turks and the Ottomans, and I tell them, gentlemen, we were all... So it is a crime to defend the Ottomans in Albania. You know, in 2000 and probably 4, or when the time I think Davutoglu was a minister without portfolio, there was a very nasty article by a friend of our Prime Minister Edi Rama called Max Velo. He wrote in a Shekuli newspaper. He was attacking Turks, saying these bastards, these barbarians. In that time, I wrote an email to the Turkish embassy. I told them, I'm sorry, I'm writing to you because if you were to be gypsies, the article against gypsies, I would have written to some other organizations. But look, there is this nasty article insulting a nation called Turks. And I think you are the embassy which represent these people. And they didn't even respond to me. I had to write to the foreign ministry to get a response. And what they did in that time, they called me in the embassy, they gave me some lokum and some flowers and told me, thank you very much. But try to attack the Greeks, try to attack Russians. You know, we have a very good Russian embassy in Albania. They respond for every insult that happens against the Russians and their state.
They respond right away.
Because they have so many institutions, you know. They take Albanians on Fulbright scholarship. They recruit the Albanians, you know.
Yes.
So they're recruiting even the Gulenists. When Erdogan, you probably saw my Twitter comment, when Erdogan came to Albania, they took the head of the Gulenist of Albania, who was head of the Muslim community, who now is no longer head. He was on a Fulbright scholarship in the United States. They sent him to the Voice of America, and he was attacking Turkey. Look what they're doing. Look how organized they are.
Yeah.
But the advantage of Turkey with the Albanians is that majority of people are Muslim.
Right.
Our heritage is Ottoman.
Right.
Turkey needs to do a better job. I think we are going into 1 hour and 2 minutes. I propose that we stop this conversation. I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I hope that people who are going to see our conversation will be enlightened. We discussed many things that for many people, especially the English-speaking public, they do not know. I make many lectures in Albanian, articles in Albanian, but I'm a bit lazy to write in English, and writing all these things in English, you'll need books. So I would really like to thank you for participating in this presentation. You had so much noise because here in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur is windy and a storm, and but it was really enlightening talking to you, Mujeeb.
Thank you. Thank you from Chicago. It's very cold here, but it's we have a big Albanian community here too. So, but it was very nice talking to you.
Thank you very much, Mujeeb. Assalamu alaikum, and see you.
See you soon.